All right. Mr. Trépanier, guys. Let's put Mr. Trépanier as the moderator. Add moderator. Boom, Mr. Trépanier. Sir, you are now moderating. Coach, what are your thoughts on morality? Oh boy. Do you think God is the source of morality? Or is morality something we can objectively deduce? I ask because I know you watch Sam Harris. That's from Cremidis. Well, Cremidis, look, I'll tell you something. I find that, I've said before, Sam Harris is a very intelligent guy, but I don't find he's a very wise person. I think he said some incredibly ignorant things, especially about Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, okay? As a matter of fact, Juan Cole, a scholar in Islam, he wrote a beautiful article. He wrote a 2-part article saying everything, literally this is the name of the article, like I'm paraphrasing here, but it's literally everything Sam Harris says about Islam is wrong. And Juan Cole, a PhD in Islamic studies, an Orientalist, he challenged Sam to a debate on Twitter. He said, look, what you're saying is total propaganda. You're not reading contextually. You're taking verses out of context. You never quote the Quran in its proper context. You slander Islam. You slander Judaism. You slander Christianity. Bring it to the table. And he wouldn't. And he just simply won't. He said some extremely ignorant things. Now, is he a logical person? Is he a rational person? Yes. Is he extremely biased? Yes. Is he profiting after 9/11? After 9/11, there's been a wave of Islamophobia. Literally, 1 to 3 anti-Muslim books have been printed a day since 9/11. A day. Okay, there's lots of anti-Islamic propaganda. Now, they've done this with Judaism in the past. They've done this also with a variety of races and nations. Okay, they've done this in the past, having false propaganda. It is not true that his most ignorant statement, the statement I have the most trouble with, he says, Sam Harris says, and I'm going to get to your question, okay? I just want to tell you where I stand with this whole Sam Harris thing. He says, look, you're either like Al-Qaeda, because that's Islam, or you're a fake Muslim. If you're not like Al-Qaeda, you're not really a Muslim, because Islam is really just what Al-Qaeda does. So he's saying if you're really a Muslim, if you're an authentic Muslim, you're an Al-Qaeda guy. That's what you think. That you've got to be bloodthirsty and deranged. Now, if that is the case, why is it that 99.999% of all the scholars in Islam, both Muslim and non-Muslim scholars, completely disagree with him? Say that Sam Harris, who's not a scholar in theology or Islam by any means, they're all saying, look, this guy's totally wrong. Doesn't know what he's talking about. Why won't he quote the Quran? He never quotes the Quran. He very rarely mentions anything directly about the Quran because he knows that any verse he quotes and tries to take it out of context, he's going to get bombarded by the context of when these verses were revealed and why were they revealed and what happened before and after, etc. Just like Juan Cole did in his articles. He's saying, look, it has nothing to do with Islam. That's one reason why I don't like the guy too much. I'll be honest with you, because he spread so much Islamophobia. And my family's Muslim, my kids are Muslim. And yes, we feel the effects. So many times I get messages, hate messages, or people, cursing me or whatnot. Why? Because we're Muslim. And it's just not right. It's totally wrong. I'll tell you something. We're the most peace-loving, tranquil people. Okay, there are good Muslims, there are bad Muslims, but I'll tell you something. Al-Qaeda kills more Muslims than any other group. Okay, so we dislike Al-Qaeda more than anybody in the world. Muslims dislike Al-Qaeda more than, we're the biggest victims of Al-Qaeda and such groups. Okay, ISIS, etc. So his philosophy, listen, I've reviewed his philosophy. He's a good philosopher. He's not a great philosopher. That's my opinion. He seems to be unaware of certain key ideas. Okay, so one thing he says, look, we can use our human reason to use our rationality to find out what's right and wrong in the world. Well, he's clearly not well versed in objective morality, the idea of objective morality. I love how Jordan Peterson answered him once upon a time. He answered him and he said, what's so irrational? Because don't forget, Harris says we're going to rationally decide what's right and wrong. What's so irrational about, this is Jordan Peterson's reply, of taking what I want. What's so rational about that? It might be irrational to you, but the guy with the biggest guns, the guy with the most tanks, the guy with the most nuclear weapons, the guy with the most power, he's going to say might is right. I don't care what your rules are. Imagine tomorrow I'm the most powerful man in the world and I walk into a bank and I take the money. I take their money and they call the police and I just crush the police. Whichever way, I just, have a larger gang than the police, and then they call the army and my gang crushes the army. If you have all the power, you can make up what's right and wrong. If God doesn't exist, this is very well established in philosophy. I don't want to get too deep into it, but listen, FYI, guys. Okay, read Nietzsche if you guys want a really heavy dose of this. If there's no God, then there's no morality. It's just whoever has the most power, he's going to decide what he'll tolerate from us. That's all it is. You have the law of the jungle. That's it. Now, Emmanuel Kant, and I'm giving you a non-Muslim source, because he came to the same conclusion as many great Islamic thinkers, is that I have this innate sense of right and wrong. Now, what does it mean to have an innate sense? An innate sense, I'll teach you guys a little basic philosophy, okay? You can know something deductively. Think of like Sherlock Holmes, okay? Deductive or inductive. I don't want to split hairs here, but let's call it mathematics, okay? You're using your logic and your wits. And then you have inductive or your empirical knowledge. So for instance, you're doing an experiment, how hot does water have to get before it boils? Well, there's no logic to that. I have to go out in the world and have to experiment. That's an inductive type of reasoning. I have to go some trial and error. And now I have deductive, inductive, two types of reasoning. And now I have also something called innate knowledge. Now we have examples in philosophy of innate knowledge that are irrefutable. Okay, like for instance, the one irrefutable sense of innate knowledge is our conscious minds. We can't deny our conscious minds. Even though we have zero scientific evidence for our conscious minds, zero. Like if I open up your brain and I look inside, there's no consciousness to be observed. There's only flesh materials. There's only concrete materials to observe. And if I try to deduce that you have a conscious mind, it's impossible. The only reason I believe you have a conscious mind is because I have one myself, and that's not deduction. That's known innately. So we have this innate sense to us. And here's the big punch, okay, that I feel that a lot of philosophers forget. Is innate knowledge is not subject to cross-examination. So let me give you a, for instance, to make it more clear, okay? Let's say I tell you I have a toothache. Now, is it my tooth that's really giving me that ache? Well, that's a question for empirical research. Now, maybe it's my gum, or maybe it's a cancer I have in my jawbone and I'm mistaking it for my tooth. That's possible. It's subject to cross-examination. If you tell me I have a pain in my tooth, and later we discover, no, it's actually your jaw that's infected, it wouldn't surprise anybody, because the person experiencing the pain made an empirical error. He assumed that it was his tooth, but it's really his jawbone. It's subject to cross-examination. Maybe the pain is psychosomatic. Maybe there's nothing wrong with his tooth and it's just something he dreamt up. He's a little bit nuts in the head, and that's also subject to cross-examination. However, here's what's not subject to cross-examination. His innate sense of pain, his experience of pain, if he's feeling pain, whether it's psychosomatic or it's the jawbone or it's not the tooth or it's the gum line or whatever it is, that is known innately. He didn't have to be, think about it, you don't have to be very rational to feel pain. You don't have to be very experimental to feel pain. You don't have to be scientific in the least to feel pain. That is known just simply intuitively. Intuitive knowledge is well understood in the circles of epistemology, is not subject to cross-examination. It is not. If you feel something directly, that's what it is. There's nothing we could do about it. We can't convince you otherwise, and there's no need to. This is your direct experience. Now, Emmanuel Kant said something really profound once upon a time, and it might be lost on many of us, okay, because this is very deep stuff. Don't forget, Emmanuel Kant's one of the greatest thinkers of all time. He said, look, I can't shake this sense in me that I feel that it is true that things are right and wrong, that it's not made up, that I actually see things happen in nature and I feel that, hey, that's unfair. I have this weird sense inside me. Don't forget, this is not known deductively, so I can't define it for you. It's not known empirically, so I cannot create an experiment for it. Emmanuel Kant is saying, look, I only know it innately. It cannot be contested. It cannot be cross-examined. Does he really know it innately? Well, you have to look, do you feel that too? I personally do feel that. Now, when atheists or secularists or agnostics say, look, we don't believe in that. And there is, of course, there's always two schools of thought or more. The people who disagree with this, they're going to typically tell you, look, there's nothing wrong with any activity. Any human action is not right or wrong. It's just up to you guys. It's up to you to decide what's right and wrong. So if you tell them, well, what about bestiality? Yep, that could be okay. I mean, as long as society accepts it, or the guy with whoever's in charge allows it, then there's nothing wrong with that. Inherently wrong. Obviously, everybody will find it gross and disgusting. But then you find yourself in these kind of like weird situations where you basically have to say yes to everything, which philosophers on another hand reject. Not all philosophers, of course not, but I share with Emmanuel Kant that I do see things in nature or see things in the world around me that are inherently wrong, and I could not have this innate idea unless it was truly right or wrong. And this innate idea, guys, is not subject to cross-examination. That's where most people will fail to understand that innate ideas are not subject. They're known innately. By definition, they're not subject to that. Now, I don't know how much of this you guys can absorb, most of you or some of you, but I hope that helped clear up your answer. All right. Yes, he is. He wrote a book on objective morality. That's from Alex Padron. Alex, all due respect, his book on objective morality is not going to shake the philosophy world. It's not going to shake the world of ethics. Okay, it's going to convince a lot of people who don't know much about philosophy. At the end of the day, he's appealing to aesthetics. Is it wrong? No, it's not wrong. He's just, if he can convince millions of people, then he can start his own. He can start his own movement. I just don't feel he's going to do that. The reason why he's not going to do that, in my opinion, is because he has a negativity towards him. He doesn't understand the most important thing about ethics. Here's what Sam Harris does not understand, that I think Jordan Peterson explained to him quite nicely. All your ideas of right and wrong come from religion, the thing he hates the most. Where do you think your idea of halal and haram comes from? Sin and vice and all these, it all comes from religion. If you don't believe me, go to the Supreme Court Justice. Go to America, find the Supreme Court Justice, and they have the 18 great lawgivers. Statues. They have statues of the 18 great lawgivers. Where do you think the Americans got their ideas when they established their state? They looked at all the past civilizations that had great rules. One of the great civilizations of the day, in the past, was the Islamic Golden Age, where many groups, Jews, Christians, agnostics, secularists, atheists, lived together in harmony. Who did they elect? Who did they erect a statue to? Muhammad, Moses holding the Torah, Muhammad holding the Quran. They took many. Why is there a statue of Muhammad holding the Quran in the Supreme Court Justice? Look it up. You'll find it. It's well understood that no civilization in history, please correct me if I'm wrong, put it in the comment section, existed prior to religion. They all had a religion and then civilization occurred. We have no instance of civilization and then religion. We only have a religion, right and wrong, community. Look, God drew this line in the sand, okay? Don't kill, don't murder, don't covet your neighbor's wife, don't lie, don't steal. If we all agree to this, we'll be a strong nation. Well, why shouldn't we lie or steal? No, don't philosophize. Stop. God said so. It's the ultimate authority. You cannot argue with this. Okay, great. We accept. All these ideas of right and wrong that he loves so much, that he holds so dear, that he thinks are so valuable to him, it wasn't easy to see the value of not lying. It wasn't easy to see the value of not stealing. Today we know the value because we're looking in hindsight. So if, for instance, there are two nations. One nation, they promote lying, cheating, and stealing. Get ahead, do whatever it takes. but get ahead. And the other nation, they say, no, don't lie, cheat, or steal to one another. Let's be fair. Don't covet your neighbor's wife and follow the commandments. Okay. Which nation will survive? Well, this nation on this hand here, they're going to lie, cheat, and steal from each other. It's amazing that even the crime syndicates eventually discovered that this is bad. Like, for instance, if you go into a den of thieves or if you go into jail and you're what they call a rat, if you're a thief that lies about another thief or tells on another thief, you're considered the lowest of the low, because as thieves, we cannot thrive. Even the thieves hate lying. Like, for instance, if you're a rapist, they got to put you in a separate wing in the prison, because even the thieves don't want, even the people, the worst of the worst, even the most harsh criminals, they think that, no, we can't live with this type of corruption. This is harmful to us as a group. So back to my original example. Okay, you can find this example in the Republic by Plato. This nation that promotes lying and cheating and stealing, they know that when I'm not looking at you, I know you're trying to steal from me. And when you're not looking at me, you know I'm trying to steal from you. So we're secretly always plotting against one another. By the time one of us thrives, this other group here has worked together and they've surpassed us by light years. The more corruption, the more the state is likely to fail over time. The less corruption, there's so many books written about how civilizations fail. The famous saying that civilizations don't die, they commit suicide. Why? Because they thrive, they go through a stage of maturity, and then they become really corrupt. Because everybody wants the goods. Everybody wants the resources. This nation, because they're so successful, they're rewarded with resources, and then they start to fight over the resources. Once a country becomes very rich and prominent and influential, it starts getting really corrupt, usually, okay? Where do you think you learned all this? It comes from religion. Like it or not, every religion comes with a code of ethics. And it's all based on God. That's the history of ethics, gentlemen. Like it or not, that's what it is. And Sam Harris tries to sweep it under the rug and say, no, we don't need any of that. At least pay homage. At least say, look, I'm a secularist. I see the value of the Ten Commandments. I just think we should adapt them to our modern day. I think that, I've grown to become atheist now. I don't believe in the deity part no more. At least give a salute to where the civilization that you love so much, where it comes from. It comes from our religion. At the end of the day, this is where it comes from. Okay, guys, that was a major left turn. How many minutes are we in? We're at 56 minutes. Let me end it on a nice little note here. What else we got? Have you heard of Gödel's incompleteness theorem? And if you did, what philosophical implication do you think that has? I have heard of it. It's not coming back to mind. I got to look it up again. I'm sorry for I haven't gone over it in a very, very long time. I will have to look for it again. Coach, what do you think of Sufism, and how would you personally define God? Do great fighters need a belief in God? That's from Terrence Strong. Well, listen, Sufism, I have a very soft spot for Sufism. I think Sufism is great. If you look at all the classic Muslims, they were all Sufis, all of them. But Sufism, I think, means something very different today. Okay, so if you look at the classic Muslims, they all referred to Islam, the true Islam, as Sufism. Now, if you look at the Sufi Muslims, they're all peace and love and very, laid back, and fighting is the last resort. And what's Sufism about? It's exactly what we were talking about earlier. Now, if you guys want to go on this chain, because Terrence spent $20 on this question. So, Terrence, I'm going to give you a prolonged answer, okay? A good answer. I think that you guys are going to like. There are very few statements in philosophy we agree on unanimously. Even 1 + 1 = 2, guys. I know, don't fall out of your chair right now, okay? I believe 1 + 1 = 2. You believe it. 99% of us believe it. There's always a philosopher out there who's even going to argue against that. Don't ask me how. Basically, they're going to say that this 1 + 1 = 2 is just happening in your head. It has no truth value whatsoever. Let's not even get into that. But I'm just saying, look how far philosophers go. Philosophers are so critical. They're so skeptical. It's crazy. But there is a group of people out there that are even more skeptical than philosophers. Who are these people that are even more skeptical than philosophers? I'll tell you who. The mystics. Mystics are more skeptical than philosophers. The first mystic in the history of Western civilization during the Enlightenment period was René Descartes. He came so close. He came so close to mysticism. He just missed by a hair. He just missed. Now listen, any statement I give you, there's always somebody who's going to come and cross-examine you and find a little speck of doubt. Okay, if you ever read Descartes' Meditations, that's what he does. He doubts mathematics, he doubts science, he doubts everything. He says, look, let me play devil's advocate. Let me pretend there's a demon out there with the power of a deity, and he's always trying to confuse me. Every time I do an experiment, he's trying to blotch my experiment. He's saying I got to have a fundamental belief that's so strong, even a demon couldn't possess me to believe something to be untrue. And Descartes gets really close with what is known to be the cogito. I think, therefore I am. He came really, really close, but he didn't hit mysticism. Came really close. Who hit mysticism? Well, the first mystics were the Muslim thinkers. Like it or not, it was them. The first mystics in history, recorded mystics, the ones we know of. Maybe it was Parmenides and the Greeks. If not, if you don't agree Parmenides was a mystic, because the problem with Parmenides is we don't have his exact writings. Okay, we only have his works, his dialogues, and Plato. And with Plato, it's not 100% mysticism. Here's one of the greatest mystic sayings in the history of mysticism. And let's see if you can wrap your mind around this. Avicenna said, "There is existence." Can anybody out there find any doubt in that statement? There is existence. Any way you look at it, if you're in the Matrix, if you're having a dream, if there's a demon out there trying to confuse you, like Descartes tried to, very entertainingly, he writes about it in his book of meditation. I highly recommend it. It's a great book. Even if there was this demon or whatnot, or whatever craziness you want to come up with, anything, like I'm even if I was under the influence of the strongest drug in history, you still can confuse me about this statement. There is existence. Now, this is just the opening door. Avicenna said, look, I have this one thing I could be 100% sure about. I'll never doubt this one thing. What is this one thing? There is existence. This outdone what Descartes said. Descartes said something many years later, 600 years later. He says, I think, therefore I am. You couldn't confuse me about that, because even if you gave me a false thought, that false thought would prove that I exist, because to have thoughts, I have to exist. That is the essence of the cogito. So he thought that was super solid, just as solid as what Avicenna said. But he was wrong. Okay, Nietzsche later corrects him. You can't say I think. I think is a presupposition. You can't presuppose anything in philosophy. We'll knock you down. We'll break your building down. We'll find whatever you presuppose and we'll knock it down. You can't presuppose anything when you say there is existence. Now, back to what I was saying earlier. Is that known deductively? Do you know that by logic or reason? No, you do not. Do you know it by some kind of scientific experiment? No, you do not. You only know it intuitively, innately. So it seems that our journey to knowledge, our start, is an innate knowledge, not a rational one. So there is something higher than reason. There is something that precedes reason. Precedes reason. Now, Avicenna gave a great thought experiment, but I think it's just too much for this podcast. It's just way too much. It will just confuse people and enrage people, actually. But he proved this point beautifully, that there is existence. And from there, he launched his philosophy in many different directions. But this was an unshakable truth. The fact that you first are an innate being. You know things innately. Why did he bring this about? Because he just basically proved to us that all of the universe happening around us is first happening in this point of awareness. Okay, so there is existence. That reduces human beings, listen carefully here, not to bodies, not to flesh and bone, but to a point of awareness. And even you have to take away that point. Forget point. You have no proof of point. That's a presupposition. That's something you've adorned this experience with. There's only this awareness. this oneness, this infinity that didn't start or begin or it'll never have an end, etc. Everything else is encompassed in this awareness. This is something called, if you want to look it up for those of you who are more interested, it's called the egocentric predicament. And from there, there's a whole host of beliefs, arguments, experiences a human being can have. But this is the foundation of mysticism. They went so far, they doubted so much that, you know, once you get to anywhere near their level of doubt, most people have dropped off. They won't get that doubtful. They won't be that critical. But these thinkers were the most critical. They wanted something not 99% certain, 100% certain. And that led them to a spiritual type of belief, not to an empirical or materialistic one. Again, I'm putting it in very short terms. I'm giving you guys a brief history of mysticism, very brief. And that's my answer to you, my friend. Does that make you a good fighter? No. No, it doesn't make you a good fighter. It's it's of intrinsic value, my friend. It's not of extrinsic value. Extrinsic value is, does it put money in my bank account? Does it put gas in my car? Does it put food in my belly? Does it put a roof over my head? Those are extrinsic things. Mysticism has nothing to do with extrinsic. You don't become a mystic because you want to make money. You don't become, but some do. Some will give they'll see people dying and they'll see people sick and they'll put on this, hey, I'm this holy man type guy, and they'll rub them blind. Some do, some don't. But when you go on this type of quest for knowing, it's because you have a thirst for truth. You have a thirst for what is real. You know, you're curious. You're genuinely curious. If you want money, if you want to be a good fighter, well, you got to train hard. If you want to, put a roof over your head, you got to work. You got to find, start a business. Now, look. Do I believe in predestination? Yes. Does that entail God chose all things? Yes. I do believe in determinism. I'm a hard determinist. That's a talk for another day. I'm a hard determinist. That's the philosophy I adopt to. I believe in the qadar, the determinist. Yes, that's determined by God. So ultimately speaking, all things are determined by God. But nobody goes on a journey to know the truth. Okay, if you're going to go that far, it's because you are curious. And you can expect a pot of gold at the end, a spiritual pot of gold, yes. An intense happiness, yes. A brand new Lamborghini, no, I wouldn't, that's not the case. Okay, guys, let's wrap it up. Last question. Let me refresh one last time. All right. Let me do one last one. We're over an hour. Another fun podcast. Passed really quickly. I'm just I'm refreshing my page here. Still a lot of people in the chat room. Excellent connection, it says. Okay. All right, lots of chats jumping in. Wow. What do you think of Jesus? Oh boy, man. This really is a ask me anything. This is a really big, massive ask me anything. Okay, guys. All right, that'll be the last one, okay? Listen, it's a very important topic because so much there hasn't been a more controversial life in human history. I don't care if you're atheist or Christian or Muslim or Jewish. We all have to admit unanimously that this is the most controversial life in history. Now, let me give you my thoughts, because I have studied what Jewish scholars say, Christian scholars say, Muslim scholars say, and agnostic/secular scholars say. I have read so many books on Jesus, the historical Jesus. I've read the Bible. I've read the Quran. I've read all these materials. It's a massive amount of reading. There's so many books written on the story of the Messiah, the story of Jesus Christ. I don't care if you're the most hardcore atheist, you're even interested. So many people become biblical scholars and they don't even believe in Christianity. So many people become scholars in Islam, like we call them Orientalists. No, they don't come from a Muslim background. They're just interested in the 6th and 7th century and they want to know all about it. Here's where Christianity is very different from Islam and Judaism. Okay, so every religion, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they all trace their roots back to Abraham. Okay, so they're the Abrahamic religions. They all critique one another. Okay, they all have their critiques of one another. Christianity did something in particular, though. Christianity did something so unique, so different, that it has become a whole different almost system. And let me explain, okay? Please give me a chance to explain. In Judaism, you have this innate, we believe this innate, there's an innate sense of God. In Islam, in the Quran, it tells you specifically that there's an innate belief. It's called the fitra of God. You're born with this religion. Like when you were in the womb of your mother, you didn't know anything about your name. You didn't know anything about the world outside. You had no sensory experience, but you had this thing inside. You had this consciousness. You had this innate sense, this innate sense of existence. We just talked about there is existence. Okay, you had this being to you. You had this fitra. And Christianity comes along, and very specifically a man named Paul, and he says this. He says, look, this man named Jesus Christ was crucified. He died and was resurrected, and this historical event, if you believe in it, you're saved. If this historical event did not happen, your faith is in vain. Okay, this is Paul writing this in his epistles, in his letters. He now took the Abrahamic faiths from the belief in one God. I'm not saying I'm not going to debate the Trinity here. I'm not saying that the Trinity is more than one God. I'm saying because before in Abrahamic religion, in Islam, all you have to do is believe in one God and be a good person. And now Paul is saying, look, not only you have to believe in one God, forget about being a good person, that's another topic. He says, you have to believe in this historical event. You have to believe in this historical event. If you don't believe in this historical event, Islam doesn't ask you to believe in a historical event. The Hebrew law doesn't ask you to believe in a historical event. Yes, there's the flood of Noah, Adam, these are things are told to us by authority, by faith. Some might argue it's metaphorical, some literal, etc. But that's irrelevant. You can say, look, I think this is more metaphor, this is more realistic, this is more. These are things that in time, according to science, again, if you read Imam Ghazali's work, he says, look, science will tell us what is metaphorical, what is literal. But Paul went completely to the other extreme. Paul said, look, this thing, if it didn't happen, you're lost. And if it did happen and you don't believe it, you're lost. Like this historical event is got to be known. Okay, so we look, hey, let's research this historical event. Let's see what happened exactly. So you have the Bible telling you this is what happened. And then you have secular sources that have nothing to do with Christianity. Because historians, if you're going to be a good historian, you want multiple attestations that are independent, So if a store was robbed in your neighborhood and 10 people who don't know each other tell you the exact same story, you can be like, hey, that store was robbed in this very particular way. When we look at the secular sources, there are no mentions of this man named Jesus Christ who was sacrificed. Okay, there's no mention. There's only one mention, which is the book of Josephus, which is a very questionable forgery. I don't want to get into why, but Josephus was a Jew who converted to paganism, who is referring to Jesus as the Christ. Now, no Jew would ever refer to Jesus as the Christ, because Christ would mean he's the Messiah. No Jew believed that Jesus was the Messiah in that time, because that mean you would be a follower of Christ. Christ means if you say he's the Messiah, that means you believe in him. So it was just nonsensical. Okay, scholars will tell you that's a Christian forgery, 100%. The secular proofs that Jesus was crucified are very negligible, highly negligible, like incredibly negligible. So all you can refer to is the Bible. Okay, so we look at the Bible. Now, this becomes very circular. Why? Because Paul is telling you, Paul is the first writer of the Bible. He wasn't there. He's a self-proclaimed apostle. And he says, look, Jesus Christ came to me in a vision. He was sacrificed. He was raised. And I'm not a liar. Okay, well, how do I know Jesus Christ was crucified? It says it in the Bible. Well, okay, who told me that? Paul. So Paul is giving credit to the Bible. The Bible is giving credit to Paul. It's circular. One is identifying the other as being true, but they're from the same voice. Like, for instance, Paul says, hey, I went to meet Peter and James, and I spent 2 weeks with Peter, Peter being the right-hand man of Jesus Christ. But he's the one saying that, not Peter. Peter is not corroborating the story. Who corroborates the story of Paul? Every document we have is highly questionable and very likely forged. Like the letters of Peter. If you ask the scholars, don't ask me. Don't ask a Muslim scholar. Don't ask a Jewish scholar. Ask a Christian scholar or a secular scholar. They all say the same. We're not sure of all the letters of Paul, who wrote them. So even the letters of Paul that you have today in your Bible, or an amalgam, they're a collage of other letters that he supposedly wrote. 7 out of the 14 are questioned to be forgeries. Like there's so, if you listen to a biblical scholar talk about how the Bible was compiled and the troubles of how, if they're historical or not, even the most fundamental Christian has to question the historical accuracy of the Bible. Even the most like for instance, there's a scholar, his name is Mike Tyson, a believing evangelical scholar, historical scholar. He says, look, we don't even know who wrote Matthew. He admits to it. He says, look, the book of Matthew, it's not really Matthew. It's not the disciple Matthew. Actually, the book is anonymous. And then he tells you, again, this is not me speaking, this is Mike Tyson. And then you talk scholars like Bart Ehrman, who are former fundamental Christians, He just said, look, I can't believe in it because of the problem of evil. Plus, we don't know who wrote Mark. We don't know who wrote John. There's so many questionable beliefs that you have to say, historical beliefs. You have to say, look, this is theology. This is not history. Then I could be with you. I could be like, look, it doesn't matter if it happened that way. It's the lesson. Okay, it's the lesson. It's not the event. The events are just like allegory to give you an idea of what's right and wrong, etc. Okay. But it's not the case. It can never be the case because Paul drew a line in the sand and he said, look, I wasn't there to, by the way, Paul was not there to see the crucifixion. He's saying, but I'm telling you it's true because I had a vision of Christ. Vision. He was on the road to Damascus. You know, you guys should know this. It's a very popular story, a massively popular story. He was on the road to Damascus and he had a vision of Jesus Christ, and Jesus came to him and told him, hey, why do you kick against the goad? Now, this is a very old translation. I don't know if you guys still read it that way, but because there are different translations. But the most popular back in the day, I would say the late 90s, early 90s, was, why do you kick against the goad? Why are you going against me? So he converted to Christianity, and he says now he believes in this historical event called the crucifixion. And now Jesus died for your sins. And now if he died for your sins, this historical event, you have to be confident. You have to believe in this historical event. This is where Paul took the Abrahamic faiths and he got off track. He took it on a different track. Okay, I don't want to be judgmental here. Consider 9/11. Okay, consider 9/11. We have video cameras of what happened on 9/11. We have eyewitness testimony. We have millions of people who saw the video, millions and millions, and we have thousands of people who witnessed it. Still, there are incredible questions, and that just happened 20 years ago. Almost 20 years ago. Excuse me, 2001, 19 years ago. What happened to Building 7? Was there bombs in the building? How come it fell at the speed of free fall? Some people even question, was it a plane or is it just imagery? Or so many conspiracies. We cannot be sure exactly what happened on 9/11. I personally believe 2 planes crashed in the building. I don't know if there was bombs in the building. I can't even tell you. You know, the guy who designed the building said that it could withstand multiple Boeing jets, and et cetera, et cetera. So many. Here's the thing. We can never have a historical fact from 2,000 years ago. We can never. There's no historical fact. There's only consensus, and consensus changes over time. And the only reason you have so many people believe in this event is because of the Bible. But then you go and check the history of the historical accuracy of the Bible, and there are many issues. Many. Matthew misquotes the Septuagint. He definitely misquotes the Septuagint, no doubt about it. He has several errors. I don't want to get into it because I know people are getting very touchy about it. But this is not me saying this. This is Christian scholars say openly. Get any book by Bart Ehrman. Any book. Get even the most fundamental evangelical. His name is James White. Probably the most intelligent evangelical I've ever come across. Even he admits there are errors. Even he admits. He says, look, the Bible is in there somewhere, among all these texts. But we don't have the original. But let me tell you something about the original. It's, how can I say this? The oldest manuscripts are in the 800s. Let's be generous and say the full manuscripts. The full biblical manuscripts, let's say the oldest ones, are from the 6th, 7th century. And I'm being very generous here. Everything else before is fragments. And these fragments, the closer you go to the Jesus Christ story, the more different they are and the more fragmented they are. So the more the story fades, the more the story gets confusing. And believe me when I tell you, I've researched this for, I would say, at least 15 years, 10, 15 years. Nobody really knows what the historical Jesus said or did. They know very little. There's very little to be confident about. Yet Paul, in his alleged writings, they're not even sure about at least half the letters of Paul. This is not, again, not me. Scholars are saying these are the questions, and they have good reasons why, okay? Because writing styles change over time. Don't forget, when you make something up, you're using less archaic language. So if I find something that's really old, first of all, the paper it's on better be old, the ink it's on better be old, and the language better be very archaic. Because the way people speak today is very different than the way people speak in the 80s. But guess what? It's way different than people spoke in the 1600s. Their language was much more archaic, and the farther you go, the farther back you go, the less words you have, and the more archaic the sentences are. So they could tell you, hey, look, somebody spliced in, cut and paste some new chapters. They have very, very strong evidence of this. I've heard their lectures. It's very hard for me to repeat them verbatim. So, if you're an Orthodox Christian, your faith, according to Paul is the founder of Christianity. Nobody can argue that. He's the one who propagated Christianity. You know what's funny? There's a great documentary on YouTube. Look it up. It's called The Real Jesus Christ. Let me look up for you. Hold on a second. All right, hold on. Let me see. Let me find it for you real quick. I'll give you guys the exact title. It's let's see. It basically sums up the modern consensus. Okay. All right, let me see if I can find you guys. All right, here it is. Yeah, this is it. Okay, so look, I'll cut and paste it. You guys watch this documentary. I think this is the right one. I'm going to put it in the chat right now, guys. I'm going to drop it right now. So basically, it talks about, at the end of the video, it talks to you about the Ebionites. Basically, the truest followers of Christ, the early Christians. And Bart Ehrman actually has great courses on early Christian thoughts. The early Christianities, which I've listened to it several times. The early Christians, what did they believe? We have no idea. We don't know. It's very unlikely that they believed Jesus was a God. Very unlikely. And the crucifixion story, there's a lot of different beliefs on that. Okay, many, many different beliefs. And I can go on, but this is just too much theology for this channel. The point being is this. Paul competes with the Ebionites, the original followers of the Jerusalem church. The first church in history, guys, is the Jerusalem church. Paul admits it himself. It's Peter and James. They have the Jerusalem church. They have a beef with Paul. The Ebionites, the followers of Jerusalem church, they think Paul is the Antichrist. Listen to this. Anyways, watch that documentary. There's James Dominic Crossan, a very renowned scholar, a couple of other scholars. Basically, everything they're saying is what modern scholarship is saying. It's just a modern understanding of the Jesus Christ story. Don't forget, many new manuscripts in the last few hundred years have been studied, broken down. And now today with computer technology, they're able to do things they were never able to do in the past. And basically, nobody has any idea what happened in the first century. They're all just cutting and pasting, guessing, so many different theologies, so many different possibilities. At the end of the day, Paul made Christianity about history. Islam and Judaism is about innate faith. Reasonable faith. Where did I come from? I have this sense of right and wrong. I have this sense, I believe in one God. I was born with this innate idea. It makes sense that I came from something else. How was I born into this world? You have all these existential questions you're asked to reflect on in the Torah and in the Quran. Paul took Christianity in another direction. He made it about a historical event, and we can never know history. We can never know. Some people are so sure it happened this way. How on earth would you know that? There's just so many ways when you cross-examine the story. It just doesn't hold water. And this is not me saying this. This is Christian scholars will say this openly. Okay, guys, I hope you guys all had a good time. I hope we were entertained, and I will see you all